So going in more into empathy, what Charlie Kirk said was about thinking the same thing with Elon Musk. And Brian Kilmeade's statement on Fox that homeless people should have involuntary lethal injection. And the other person that was standing on the other side of him saying that a person, again, I don't watch Fox, so I don't know the guy's name, that this person, that homeless people, that if they don't accept programs, should be jailed. In other words, to put people who are poor in prison. Because at the same time, he's calling for the cutting of these programs, and that if you don't take the programs, you go to prison. So if you're poor, you go to jail. Or if you're poor, you are lethally injected. So this is a big issue, but this goes to a society that of lacking of empathy, or a principle inside of conservative ideology that comes from people like Charlie Kirk and Elon Musk. So let's examine what empathy is. Empathy is a very complicated emotion. It is not your first reaction to anything. It is a complicated reaction to how you judge the world. It is an emotional filter. It is not a reactive thing. Reactive, human beings' reaction to situations, to threats or challenges, physical threats, intellectual threats, and spiritual threats. So let's just look at that, because there can be more threats. That's what I'm pointing at, that there can be intellectual and spiritual threats to an individual. For an intellectual threat, somebody is debating you and they're challenging your position or my position. And if you're challenging somebody's position or they're challenging yours, a person can feel threatened. Maybe the evidence that the person is bringing makes you feel like that they're calling you stupid, or that they are challenging really core beliefs of yours and saying that maybe you're wrong. So that becomes a threat to the intellectual framework in which you live your life. Spiritual threats are not God and demons. Spiritual threats are simply the philosophical beliefs of your faith. Your interpretations of the scriptures of whatever your religion is. A spiritual threat can come from people who are not your faith. It can come from people who disagree with you on your interpretation of Scripture and how important that interpretation of Scripture is to you versus what that person is bringing. Because that person may be essentially making you feel, oh, this person is trying to convince me to violate what I believe is the reason why I'm going to heaven, why I'm going to, paradise after I die. This person is condemning me to hell if I believe him, and he's out there telling people to, interpret Scripture in the wrong way and thereby going to hell. So you have the initial responses. Now, again, that might be a little bit more complicated, but in the simplest way, it is simply people who may disagree with you that you could interpret. The people who disagree with you are potential threats to the way in which you live your life, both spiritual and intellectual. And as a result, what is your first reactions in those situations? That's fight or flight, right? That's the fight or flight mechanism kicks in. Do you attack or do you retreat? That is before empathy. In a physical situation, it's the same thing. It is before empathy. Before you have an empathetic response to an individual, you have the basic fight or flight response. The hit the guy with a hammer because he is a threat, or flee, that sort of thing. That's where that sits. if you don't have empathy, that's where you are. Because empathy would rise you above that position because it's a more complicated emotion. It requires you to actually see the other being as a human being. Whereas the instinctive response is fight or flight. So empathy is later. And if your fight or flight response, your fight response kicks in and it's hit the person, then it depends upon how big of a threat do you believe that this person is to you as an individual. Is he potentially a threat to the destruction of your life? That would be like a person coming at you with a knife. Now, intellectually speaking, a person whose ideas are so intense where it literally makes you feel a threat to your very existence is that these are core beliefs that you live by, that you believe are fundamental to life. And so you will react. So your instinctive response is hit this person as hard as you can, kill this person if you can, because he is that big of an intellectual threat to you. So you have to react at the highest level of reaction. And that can cause physical reactions like grabbing a knife or something. Same thing with spiritual. So when Kilmeade and others say, like involuntary lethal injection for homeless people, or if you refuse to do as I tell you, I have the right to put you in jail, then what you create is that's what happens when you don't have empathy. Empathy might tell you that the reason why this homeless person is not accepting the program is maybe that person is, living with that position of, living with that position in life where it's, pride cometh before the fall. Pride cometh before the fall means that, for example, the person is just refusing to take the programs because they have pride. They don't want to take any program for any reason, and that's their problem. They don't want to be seen as something that is requiring charity in order to survive. They don't want that, and that's why they're there. Or things of that nature. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And then you also have, for example, people that are that believe in intellectual threats, do like what happened with Charlie Kirk, or you have situations like with Elon Musk now telling people in England, you're gonna have to fight or they're gonna kill you because they're coming to kill you. When no, a person who intellectually disagrees with you is not trying to kill you. They are debating you. They're not trying to injure you. They are trying to inform you. That's on either side. Now, of course, as you're doing that, because it's important in debate to keep an open mind. But if you do not have empathy, then it is easier not to remain in a debate with someone of whom you believe is trying to kill you, because they are threatening the very core of the intellectual core of your being, that you believe that they're a threat to that. And if they are a threat, and if you believe that they are a threat to that, then you may interpret them trying to kill you. But they're not. Because empathy would tell you they're not. They are debating me. They are trying to inform me about what they believe is the right way to live. That's why empathy is important. And why it is that when people like Charlie Kirk or Elon Musk tell you, do not have empathy, that empathy is bad, run the hell away from them. Get away from them, because what they are telling you to do is not to actually engage in actual intellectual debate, not to grow as a human being, not to see the other person as a person that has ideas, suggestions, and recommendations upon which for you to live your life and maybe find a way to live better or live differently with the ideas and suggestions and inputs that they have. Like, for example, in a religious position, the area of the Bible that I live my life by, where the core of my Christianity operates from, is what I call the skinny. When Jesus was asked about, from the wise man, what is the sum of all the knowledge, right? What's the sum point? Give me all of your philosophy real quick. Give me your pitch, is what this wise man asks Christ. And Christ says it's fairly simple. Love God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul. Love yourself as God, which means find your value, know who you are, find your identity in your faith, and then and that helps you find a sense of self. Then what he says is love thy neighbor as you love thyself. In my interpretation of that, if loving me places me to love on the level of God, and to love my neighbor as though his words may in fact be God's words, because God's words may be wrapped up in all human communication. And the reason why you're in front of this human being, the reason why maybe you're listening to me, or I'm listening to you, is there is wisdom that is being given to you, or you giving it to me. And this wisdom, this exchange of wisdom, may in fact be God's method of communicating. It's just that God's method of communicating is so vast and complicated that it's not like a direct word. It comes in pieces from all the people around you. So perhaps that is what we're supposed to do, is not to feel the threat of the person whose ideology or religious teachings are different than yours. It's to learn from it and to love them as you disagree with them. In other words, to be empathetic. God's calling is to be a person of empathy, to feel who you are, and to feel the value of others, because that is where wisdom is possible. Wisdom does not become possible when you lose empathy, because then you lose so much empathy that you literally just see homeless people as people who should be involuntarily injected, or if they don't do as you say, to throw them in jail. You need to have empathy in life. Societies become healthy because of empathy, because you get to see what is wrong, and then you might find what to do about it. But one of the major principles of faith, at least with me and empathy, is because of one of the things that guides me, and hopefully it could guide you, that when you hear a person talking, it's important for you to find the pearls of wisdom in what they are saying. Because maybe you're wrong, and there's no shame in being wrong. The shame is being wrong and continually choosing to be wrong by not having empathy to be able to listen. Because you may be walking around with a philosophy of literally involuntarily injecting poor people with lethal injection, or telling poor people, you will do as I say or I'm going to throw you in jail. You may be walking around with that philosophy simply because you don't believe because you've been told not to believe in empathy. You've been told not to see the poor person as valuable as a human being because you've been told not to have empathy. Whereas if you find empathy, you may find a way to connect with that poor person and change that person's life or come up with a solution that we have not considered yet as a society. So please like, share, and subscribe. And am I right or am I wrong? Is having a lack of empathy within a society making it so easy for a person to step on a platform like Fox and say, involuntarily execute all the poor people, or lock them up if they don't do as we say? Perhaps that's a lack of empathy. Am I right? Am I wrong? Like, share, subscribe. Thank you.